Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a true query primer to explain the fundamental anatomy of a SQL query. We're moving way beyond just writing the correct syntax and really getting into the actual mechanics of the database server. Because honestly, if you want to master SQL, you have to know how the engine thinks. So, let's kick things off with a slightly provocative question. You know when you type out your statement and hit run? What is the database server actually doing behind the curtain before it even begins to look at your data? Because, spoiler alert, it doesn't just immediately fetch rows. Well, it runs through this rigorous pre-flight checklist. First up, a permission check. Do you even have the rights to execute this statement? Next, an access check. Do you actually have permission to see the specific data you're asking for? And finally, a syntax check. Is your statement valid SQL? If you manage to pass these three tests, your request goes straight to the query optimizer. Its whole job is to build the most efficient execution plan so you don't accidentally take down the server by reading a billion rows the wrong way.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover the mechanics behind the query, the 6 query clauses, and then step through from, where, select, and finally, grouping and sorting data.
Section 1. Mechanics behind the query, the database front door.
Right, so when you log in, boom, you're assigned a unique connection ID. Your query breezes through those front door security checks we just talked about. But here is the absolutely critical part. SQL is a non-procedural language. That means you tell the database what you want, but you don't tell it how to get it. The query optimizer acts as the brain that figures out the absolute fastest way to execute your request, picking the best tables and indexes to start with.
Moving right along to Section 2. The 6 query clauses, your SQL toolkit. Here we've got these 6 core clauses making up your select statement toolkit. Select, from, where, group by, having, and order by. Now, while only select is strictly mandatory in MySQL, in the real world, you're usually going to combine at least 3 of these to get any meaningful work done.
Section 3. From, locating the data, starting the assembly line.
Look, before absolutely any data can be filtered or shown to you, the engine has to gather the raw materials, right? The from clause defines the tables and how they're linked. The database simply has to know exactly where the data lives before doing anything else.
And what's incredibly cool and honestly pretty flexible here is what actually counts as a table. It can be a permanent table stored on disk, which is what we're most used to, but it could also be a temporary table, like the rows returned by a subquery, or a virtual table created from a view stored in the data dictionary. They are all totally valid starting materials for our assembly line.
Section 4. Where? Filtering the rows, isolating the signal from the noise.
Okay, the where clause is basically the strict bouncer at the club door of your dataset. It's your core mechanism for filtering out unwanted rows, making sure only the data you actually care about makes it to the next stage.
You're going to build these where conditions by mashing up expressions, then columns or numbers with comparison or arithmetic operators. But here is a massive pro tip for you. Always use parentheses when mixing and/or operators. You group conditions logically so that you, anyone reviewing your code, and the database server are on the exact same page. Trust me, it'll save you hours of debugging logic errors later.
Section 5. Select. Choosing the columns, also known as the Great SQL Plot Twist.
I love this quote because it's the ultimate aha moment for anyone learning SQL. Even though the select clause is literally the first thing you type, it is actually one of the last clauses the database server evaluates.
There is this massive, wild disconnect between syntax and execution. You type select, then from, then where. But the engine evaluates from, then where, and then select. Why? Well, because the engine physically can't pick which columns to show you until it knows where they live and filters out all the garbage rows first.
Once the engine finally gets around to evaluating that select clause, you are totally in the driver's seat. It isn't just for dumping out raw table data. It is a remarkably powerful presentation layer. You can toss in literals, calculate complex mathematical expressions, use built-in formatting functions, and assign clean aliases so your data looks perfectly polished upon delivery.
Bringing us to Section 6. Grouping and sorting data, the final polish.
It is absolutely vital to understand the difference between filtering raw data and filtering grouped data. Where filters the raw data before grouping, while having filters the cooked, aggregated data after the group by clause does its thing. So if you want to find departments with more than 2 employees, you've got to group them first and then filter those groups using having.
And finally, we hit the end of the line. The order by clause ensures the data lands on your screen exactly how you want to read it. Ascending, descending, via expressions, it entirely dictates that final presentation step right before the server hands the data back to you.
So I'm going to leave you with this to chew on. Next time you hit run, ask yourself, are you just typing select, or are you actually building a highly efficient assembly line? Keep this mechanical blueprint in your head, the pre-flight checks, the from clause gathering materials, the where clause filtering, and the select clause formatting it all at the end. Once you really internalize this, you aren't just writing queries anymore. You are commanding the database engine. Thanks for hanging out for this explainer, and keep learning.